Hello, this is Matt on the Moon Lambo channel. In this video, I'd like to share with you information regarding a proposed amendment which would change the XRP ledger, having to do with charging fees when you include memos with the transaction. And this is all stemming from something that I reported on yesterday, having to do with a beta release of a messaging protocol with the intent of which is rather nefarious. So I'm going to briefly recover that. I'm not going to redo the video I did yesterday, I promise, but I do need to catch you up to speed on what I talked about as quickly as possible on that topic so I can show you what's going on now and some proposals for actually fixing the damage that in theory could be done from all of this. And I've also got an interesting conversation back and forth from a couple people on Twitter having to do with the idea of Ripple, of course, as we know yesterday from the second quarter report, we know that they are notably reducing the amount of XRP that they're going to be selling. So what fills the void? Or does a void need to be filled? Where is all the XRP going to be sourced from institutions that want to purchase it? Because keep in mind that the quantity of XRP that Ripple sold to institutions last quarter is the most they've ever sold to institutions. So there's clearly demand for it. So what's going to happen if they're going to be scaling that back, and what's the purpose? I'll be delving into that. And in a non-XRP related story, but crypto related of course, there's a story from CoinDesk about Venezuela utilizing Bitcoin to avoid sanctions. So I'm going to get into that. I just found the story fascinating enough that I thought I'd close the video out with it. But before we get going here, if you would please delicately tap that like button. And if you are a fan of Ripple and XRP, subscribe. You are amongst friends here on the Moon Lambo channel. This is an XRP-centric channel. All right, let's jump right in here. So there's a tweet from somebody on Twitter named Chainbreaker. And they tweeted this out. I'm an XRP holder, and besides what full history operators tell you, do it. Push their buttons to find a solution, and you do yours. Let's watch money talk. And what is he referencing? Well, this is a retweet. And so this comes from Indum. I'm not sure. I can't tell if that's an L. It might be Indolum or it might be Indum. Doesn't matter. Anyway, so here's the nefarious operator here. They tweeted this out. The name is... We'll just go with Indum for the sake of this video. Announcing the beta release of Indum. Indum, using the Indum messaging protocol, IMP, on top of the Ripple blockchain, allows users to upload files of any size to the Ripple blockchain and exist forever to be downloaded. Hashtag indestructible and hashtag immutable, hashtag crypto, hashtag censorship. Let me just tell you right now, if you ever want to find out if somebody's building on top of the XRP ledger in a legit fashion, or they're doing it to stir up some of the S word that I won't say on this channel because I'm a good Midwest boy and I don't curse. If you wonder if they're stirring the pot here, just watch for whether or not they refer to the XRP ledger as the Ripple blockchain. Okay, it is not it's not Ripple's blockchain, and even though this is blockchain technology, the proper term to use with this instead of terms, and I don't know who chose this, but it's not called blocks, even though it's functionally the same thing. It's called ledgers instead. It's the XRP ledger, not the XRP blockchain, even though it is blockchain. That's just not the terminology associated with it. Again, I don't know who started that, but it was presumably one of the creators of XRP. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But the point is, somebody that's into XRP enough to actually develop anything on top of the ledger would know something like that. So this person is out here to just cause trouble, clearly. And so let me express the concerns, what I kind of touched on briefly. And it's kind of laughable that people are trying to do this. I'm not going to get into the whole story that I covered. If you're curious, it's the last video I posted yesterday. Check it out if you want to use it as a primer before getting into this. But basically, the whole plan is to just completely spam the XRP ledger by making it possible to upload just a crazy amount of data from or using the memo line to upload images, all sorts of stuff to the XRP ledger, not the Ripple blockchain. And the purpose of doing it is to crash the system, basically. But not just that. It's in order to put very inappropriate pictures online. You can think maybe pictures of humans that, let's just say, should be utilizing more articles of clothing than they actually are. Let's just say it like that. And maybe of not an ideal age to be not using the proper quantities of cloth material to cover the body. So really sick stuff. That's what they're going for, and they're actually encouraging this type of activity. So it's absolutely disgusting, and I covered that in the video yesterday. So I won't go into it in any further detail. But they recognize that this is expensive, even though to upload in an individual instance, it's not that much. The quantity to which that they think it's going to be necessary to spam the system, they're predicting in the last video that I put out something like $10,000, and they think it's going to go up from there because amendments are going to be proposed and changed and all that good stuff, which is what I'm going to get into here. So this is really, really sickening stuff and disgusting, and I was admittedly kind of laughing about it yesterday, but that's not because I wasn't taking it seriously. It's because this is so ridiculous that adults are behaving like this. It's disgusting, of course, but this is ridiculous. It's just, what can you do but throw your hands up in the air when you find out some people like this actually exist and you're engaging like by reading their content. So anyway, Tiffany responded to this. Tiffany Hayden, very prominent member within the XRP community. And she basically retweeted one of her tweets, which stated, if you want a place to store your files, which is what this is all about basically, centralized infrastructure is cheaper and more reliable than a public blockchain where nobody can be forced to store data or provide it to others. And then Chainbreaker, who started this thread here, responded, hey Tiff, thanks. Still don't know how to use Google. My point still stands. Number one, why was the memo issue not solved before? Presumably meaning before all this came up. Why wasn't this issue thought of? That's the way I read it anyway. Point two, what's the reason to fix it now, economic or legal? Point three, what will the community do to /legit use cases are developed? Okay, and Tiffany responded, there's nothing to solve. And you know, in the rest of the stuff, there's only a little bit more of this particular thread to share with you, but I don't know exactly what she meant by that, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't know if she just believes that whatever this plan is, if implemented, is not going to actually work. And that could be the case. I'm going to get into my own thoughts on this too, but I just want to kind of cover with you, set the table properly so you can understand what everybody's talking about. Because there's a Ripple employee I'm about to read a tweet from that chimed in on this as well. But next up, another tweet from Chainbreaker. There is economic cost to full history nodes in case spammers starts to upload S-word. We'd say Nick, C-Tsunami, and others are developing a way to limit the memo field. Not techie here, so if you'd like, I appreciate an answer to the points I made. And then you've got Ripple employee Nick Bogalis chiming in here, which I found quite fascinating. And I'm going to show you the proposed code in just a moment here. Nick was commenting on that also, and he's worked on the XRP ledger quite a bit. So here's the tweet from him. I'm not developing anything like that, and even if I were, I'd still need to introduce an amendment and work to get buy-in from every external validator to run the new code, and vote in support of the amendment in order for the amendment to become enabled 2 weeks down the road. And so that part I did know procedurally how this works once an amendment is proposed. There are 2 weeks if it's passed anyway. That was my understanding. Once it was passed, is that you get 2 weeks to actually approve, or else I guess you fork, right? Anyway, Chainbreaker responded to that. Thanks, Nick. Can you, in layman's terms, explain what's the proposed solution here? And then there's a link to what I'm going to show you in a moment on GitHub, which is the proposed change, the code. And then I responded again. The more I think about this, the more I think it's the wrong approach. There's nothing inherently wrong with memos, and charging more for them less sense the more I think about it. Have you assessed the pros cons of the cost for this amendment here, right? Okay. And then so Nick responded, the proposed amendment by an independent developer unaffiliated with Ripple would increase the fee for transactions which include memos. And here it is, in fact, right here. So you can see right here it states charge fees for use of memo number 3007. So let me read just some of this for you here. And you'll see some of the code a little bit below. I think if you click on the commit tab, that's what it actually looks like. And I'm going to be perfectly upfront with you here. Like, when you get to the code stuff, you're absolutely over my head here. So I'm just going to share with you what I think I'm looking at, and that's going to have to be good enough. If anybody wants to correct that, please do. I do want to learn more, so I'm happy if you guys want to inform me of what I'm actually looking at. If I say something wrong, that's perfectly fine. I am very friendly when it comes to receiving constructive criticism. So anyway. So somebody on GitHub here wrote, thank you for your submission. This is in response to Crypto Bad. He says here, wants to merge one commit into Ripple develop from Crypto Brad develop. So that's my understanding that's him, and because I don't use GitHub for anything, but it seems to me that that's what... That's him making the proposal. Anyway, so then here's something from Ripple Labs Jenkins. Thank you for the submission. It will be reviewed soon and submitted for processing in CI. And We'd Say Winder, he's the creator of the XRP tip bot, and he wrote here, alternative, credits to CodeTsunami for the idea, is, so here's the alternative, he writes, is a simple proof of work-like solution find a hash, amount of prefix zeros based on the memo size, some fee bytes, and after that, find the zeros, which is very fascinating because, of course, as you know, and I understand that this wouldn't have anything to do with the consensus mechanism for solving the double spin problem, but it was fascinating to me where you've got technology, the XRP ledger, which uses consensus rather than proof of work, and it was just interesting to me, being a non-coder, to see Wietse Wind, who is developing on top of the XRP ledger, say that, hey, something similar to proof of work could actually solve this. It's not that it's proof of work, but just to solve the memo issue here. And then somebody named mduo13 responded, I like the XRP fee rather than a proof of work solution. It's more effective and more in keeping with existing XRP ledger features. To charge real value in the form of XRP rather than value in the form of work, whose actual value depends on your electricity costs and computing power. I also like how this implementation keeps memos less than or equal to 32 bytes free, equivalent to adding an invoice ID or similar hash 256 type field. Okay, so most of that was completely over my head because it's code-related stuff, but I like reading through this nonetheless because it gets you you can kind of figure out the direction which these people are kind of going and trying to solve this here. This is the part where it kind of digs into the proposed code here, and this is Ripple employee Nick Bugalis here, and you can see some of the proposed code on the screen here. And here's his initial response, and he ended up changing his tune, which I'm going to show you in a moment, but as far as I could tell anyway. But in response to the code originally, this is 2 days ago, he wrote, seems reasonable. I'd probably consider making the multiplier a function of length 2, for example. Then he gives a line of code there. He says, this gives it a nice stepped curve of increasing slope, as you can see on this Wolfram alphagram, which again, that would be outside the scope of what I understand, but I took that as, if I understood what he was saying properly, of course I don't understand the code portion, but just the rest of the normal human words, they're normal human, like English language words, it seemed to me that he's proposing that, the more you're putting on the ledger, the more it would cost, so a multiplier effect, and then it would increase presumably at an exponential pace. That's what I think he's saying anyway. That's my best interpretation of that. And then if you go down here, I don't want to read all this to you because most of this is just way too tech nerdy stuff for me. I don't know what this means, but if you go down here, there we go. Nick Bugalis. So the last thing that he wrote is, the more I think about this, the more I think it's the wrong approach. There's nothing inherently wrong with memos, and charging more for them makes less sense the more I think about it. And so here's my thought, and before I have a firm opinion, this is how I treat everything. You've probably heard me say this if you listen to me then more than one video, but I am not going to form a firm opinion on this because I don't have enough knowledge to do so. So I'm just going to share with you where I'm at with the knowledge that I do have on this particular topic, and as I learn more, it will help me to further develop what is hopefully, ideally, ultimately a firm opinion. But I don't develop firm opinions until I feel like I have sufficient knowledge to reasonably have a firm opinion, which is different than how many humans operate, but that's how I work. That's how I treat everything in my life. And so, here's the thing. So from what I understand, as far as the full history node, you can understand, it makes sense to me that some people have the concern. Here's the argument that if there's a bunch of not so good stuff, a lot of people of the unclothed variety, for example, on, and it's immutable, right? So the XRP ledger is immutable, so if it's just out there forever, I can understand how on the surface that doesn't sound good, but given the nature of decentralized technology, I wonder if it might just at some point people just have an understanding that, yes, that could happen on any decentralized blockchain, unless you're just not going to have a memo field or something like that. And it makes me wonder if that's something that people might look over in the future. Specifically, though, consider this also, my understanding also is that you don't have to run, if you're a validator, you do not have to run a full history node, which means that you don't have to have, even if it's immutable and there's all this bad stuff from 2019, say it's years in the future, 20, 30 years in the future, whatever, and there's all this bad stuff that was put up there in 2019, well, you don't have to download the full history node if you're a validator. So that would get it around it there, and then you might ask, well, why would you want to even have the full history? And I don't know that there's a good reason for it other than for archival purposes. And so when Tiffany said on that previous tab that I showed you, and I said I'd chime in on this, when she said, I don't think that it matters, I'm paraphrasing now, but I think it's an issue, whatever she said, I'm wondering if that's what she meant, is that it's not something it's not something that could ever make the the XRP ledger crumble or go away or any of this sort of stuff. It's just something to maybe make it look bad, maybe get some negative press, maybe it's something more along those lines. But I don't see how any of this actually stops it. It's just some really sick people doing some really disgusting stuff. That's the way that I view it. That's what I'm seeing here. But I'm always open-minded. So if there's somebody that wants to lead me to like has an argument this is much more serious, I'm happy to hear it. Please sway me if that's so, because I would want to sound the alarms. But at this point, I haven't seen anything to that effect. Most people just think that if anything, the way I'm reading it, it's like this is more of an annoyance. But it was fascinating from my perspective, since I'm a guy that always wants to learn more about XRP and how the ledger works and all this stuff, just to kind of dive in and take a look at what's actually going on here on like the way they're talking on GitHub itself. And I'll link to all this in case any of you want to dig in a little bit further. But let me jump into the next topic now here. And here's a tweet. This is from Corey Johnson. You may recall he's a former Ripple employee, a former television host. I'm actually not sure what he's doing right now. But he retweeted the Ripple quarterly report, the Q2 2019 report, today, early this morning. And he wrote, along the most important XRP read of the quarter, this XRP market report may be the most important yet. And he writes in parentheses, and more enjoyable since I don't have to write it any longer. And for those of you that don't know, Corey Johnson, he actually did, while he had his brief tenure at Ripple, he actually would write that with Miguel Villas, who is the head of XRP markets. I remember seeing both of them credited. And now they don't put, whoever writes it, they don't credit the individual that's writing these reports anymore. At least the last 2 or 3 maybe that I've seen, there hasn't been an actual name. I think it just says Team Ripple. So I'm like, who is writing this stuff? Who is this phantom individual? And maybe we'll never know. I'm not sure who it is, but it is very well written, and I like reading through it nonetheless. I always look forward to the quarterly reports. And from my perspective, I covered it yesterday, so I'm not going to like completely redo it. The content of yesterday, of course, that'd be dumb. But it was the most interesting, to me, the most interesting quarterly report that I've ever read. There was so much in it that I certainly could not have anticipated. It was interesting stuff. And so I want to talk about a topic that is out there because of the quarterly report, without delving into everything that I already covered yesterday, because I did a full analysis on the thing yesterday. I think my video was like 30 minutes or something. So if you're curious, go ahead and check it out. It was yesterday. And somebody named Elmer Fudd tweeted this out. How does Ripple reduce XRP sales? Over the counter? Thoughts? And then tagged Galgatron. Wrote, Galgatron, also I had a thought. I read something previously about Ripple having the right to destroy coins. Escrow, question mark? Pertinent to your other string recently about XRP pricing. And then he wants to know if it's possible / falsehood and all that. Okay. And then there's a link also to the quarterly report. And Galgatron responded, Ripple will just not sell its escrow-released coins, forcing the over-the-counter desk to source from exchanges. Ripple can destroy coins, but it would take extreme circumstances to justify this. And I gotta tell you, this is one of the reasons I love reading through threads like this. Every now and then you get something that you weren't aware of. I was not aware that there was an actual ability for Ripple to actually destroy XRP. I don't know what that looks like. I don't have additional information on it. But this is how I acquire knowledge. I read through, and eventually I'm sure I'm going to read about somebody talking about this very topic, and then I will add to my knowledge. And that's how I know everything I know today. I've been doing it for 1 year and 8 months, and it really adds up. So I hope you guys value when I go through stuff like this, because it's a great way. It's the way that I learned almost everything that I know, and it's a great. Twitter can be used as a great tool for learning such things. But anyway, so there was a response here from Digital Asset XRP Thrive. Wrote, if they are sourcing from exchanges, wouldn't this have a positive effect on price? And then Piece of Candy wrote, won't they just buy over the counter from the exchange? And Galgatron wrote, over the counter is an exchange, but now the over-the-counter will source XRP from retail exchanges. So we're going to get into this. There's another thread that I want to kind of run through here. Most of it's on a similar topic here, and I'm going to want to chime in here because I think that there are, if I'm reading this correct, there might be a misunderstanding about what it means when Ripple when they stated something along the lines of, we're going to be reducing the sales. Because the way I read it, I think it was Galgatron that wrote it. There's something to the effect of, it seemed like Ripple was still going to be providing, or was going, I could have read them wrong admittedly, but it was something like the XRP is going to be sold by Ripple in conjunction with an exchange because there's sufficient liquidity out there, and that is not the way that I read it. So let me just kind of read through this, and I'll get the juices flowing here again. But Galgatron responded to somebody asking about banks holding XRP, And then he wrote, answer the question, why does a bank want to hold XRP? And then somebody else, XRP Research Center, answered it, and the person that Galvatron posed the question to never chimed back in. So anyway, XRP Research Center stated, saving exchange fees and potentially holding an asset with negative holding costs versus fiat. Okay, I gotcha. And Galvatron responded, that's way in the future. The context of this conversation is in today. And that's exactly, I agree with Galvatron on that point. If banks are ever to hold XRP, I don't think you're going to see it on a large scale until XRP has proven itself in a way that can only be done by a lot of time passing. I don't know if that means decades or something like that. And once you see that cryptocurrencies, especially XRP, have a track record, then if the volatility ends up being diminished, as is my entire theory on all of this, which I do believe that there will be substantially less volatility once the asset class is no longer nascent, well, then it might make sense for banks to hold XRP for a variety of reasons. And I don't have to delve entirely into that in this video, but I do think that's possible. So I think XRP Research Center's point is quite valid. But I agree with Galvatron that it wouldn't be happening anytime soon. And then XRP Research Center responded to Galvatron stating, would you say SBI Virtual Currencies Trade is currently holding XRP of their own to a certain extent? And then Galvatron responded, certainly, to liquefy the exchange. Of course, that's true, yeah. And then XRP Research Center responded, would you say SBI Group has a holding in the ownership of both SBI Sumishin NetBank and SBI Virtual Currency Trade? And Galvatron responded to that, the bank itself presumably won't hold XRP, and if they do, it will be the outlier resulting from their stake in Ripple and not exemplary of the industry as a whole. And that I definitely believe is true. Like I said, I don't think you're going to see banks holding large quantities of XRP, especially not for the purpose of making markets. I don't think that's going to be happening. It's not their business model, and it's too risky for them. They'll be happy to let others do that so they can get the benefits of XRapid, and the fees presumably relatively minimal, right? And that's what we keep being told by Ripple. I believe it. So, the risk versus reward situation is such that I don't think you're going to see a ton of banks just jump on board to do that anytime soon. Anyway, XRP Research Center then responded, I just wanted to cite a tangible example of an industry player who clearly shows that licensed banks don't actually need to hold XRP directly and still indirectly hold XRP to participate in liquidity provision and remittance processes. Okay, fair point. And Galvatron responded, I think when most people think of banks holding XRP, it's in the context of liquidity for making their own cross-border payments, not serving as a market maker. That's what I was getting at just a moment ago. And then he writes, at least this would be the most XRP benefiting role. So the theory is, the way that I'm reading it conceptually, I don't know exactly what the software would look like because they're using XRapid, but the idea would be you wouldn't need to source the liquidity from an exchange. There are buying and selling fees associated at the end of the transaction, both ends of the transaction. So if you're a bank, if you are holding the XRP, you can avoid those little fees. But like I was stating just a moment ago, those fees are so small that do you want to take on the additional risk? If you're a bank, which is conservative by nature, do you want to take on the risk of holding XRP? And in 2019, the answer is no, banks don't want to hold XRP, and I think that's perfectly reasonable. Of course, that can change in the future, but there are others out there, thankfully, within the ecosystem that are happy to take on the risk of holding XRP, and exchanges are happy to take on that role. Their business model, it aligns with that. So of course they're doing it, and so of course it makes sense for banks to take advantage of that. It's a no-brainer, right? Okay, and then, let's see, somebody named Agent jumped into the conversation here and wrote, I can't comment as to whether or not that's the best thing for XRP price from those opinions, but I agree that most of us probably think banks will hold XRP for their own transactions/business, not to be market makers. Right, and let's see here. And my question is if Ripple seeded the environment with enough XRP to make it common enough to be useful via over-the-counter, there's no way they sold enough for future volumes. So except for major institutions, most entities that were interested just got a taste. So, and then you wrote ... So if big banks want more, and if over-the-counter transactions are having, that's the word he used. They're not literally being cut in half, but he's saying if it's reduced, that's what he actually means. He's saying, well, big banks need to go to exchanges not for XRapid, but to buy/hold/use. For example, if BOA bought 100 million XRP over the counter, but now realizes they need 1 billion instead of 100 million, will they get 900 million from Bitstamp? And Galvatron responded to that question with, I think the mechanism that Ripple is now employing is to keep the large institutional purposes going to XRP2 over the counter, but XRP2 has to source from exchanges instead of escrow now. And this is the point where I started to, maybe I just don't understand what Galgatron's trying to say, but if I do understand him, then what he's saying I don't think is correct here. So first of all, XRP2, the full name, that's a company. It's a registered money services business. It's a subsidiary of Ripple, and XRP2 LLC is the entity that's selling XRP to institutional buyers and the like, right? And so we already know that it was announced yesterday via the second quarter report that there's going to be a reduction in the sales of XRP through XRP2 LLC. And so the way that Galgatron, and let me just read what Galgatron wrote again, I think the mechanism that Ripple is now employing is to keep the large institutional purchases going to XRP2 over the counter, but XRP2 has to source from exchanges instead of escrow now. That last part doesn't make sense to me. So either I misunderstand him or I disagree. It's one of those. But I don't see why XRP2 would be sourcing from exchanges that it already sold to. That part doesn't make sense to me, and that's why I'm hoping that I just misunderstand, because that doesn't make any sense to me at all. Because the reason that many exchanges have XRP is because they bought it in the first place. I'm sure a lot of them got it from Ripple, frankly, and that's fine. There's certainly nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But the whole point of this is basically that now there's so much XRP out there that there's not as great a need currently with the current demand levels for Ripple to sell as much XRP. And of course, with more demand coming on board, thankfully there were 100 billion XRP created from inception, because we haven't even begun to see the type of adoption that could potentially take place. Like if Ripple achieves their goal and there's global adoption on the scale that they're envisioning, yeah, you're going to need it, right? But we're nowhere near that yet. So that's what I'm thinking. Anyway, so then XRP Research Center jumped in here and wrote, I believe there's a different interpretation of that paragraph in the latest markets report, which is liquidity has increased lately, hence Ripple doesn't have to satisfy institutional demand via over-the-counter anymore, which means prices aren't that elastic nowadays. And Galgatron responded, not sure what you mean by elastic. Do you mean volatile? And the XRP Research Center responded, it's harder to move them with institutional-sized orders. And then Galgatron wrote, I believe we're saying the same thing, just paraphrasing, to which XRP Research Center responded, I thought you were saying that Ripple is still planning to use XRP2 LLC. And here's where he tries to add some additional clarity. Galgatron wrote, what I'm reading is that institutional sales will continue through XRP2, but where exchange liquidity suffices, XRP2 will source from exchanges instead of escrow. Institutions are not going to be forced to go to exchanges for large purchases. Yeah, so that's again where I don't think that's right, or misunderstanding him, but I think that the whole point is Ripple would be selling less XRP because now there's sufficient liquidity that in many, probably not all, but in many instances, of course, where institutions could purchase from exchanges, and they'd be purchased from the retail exchanges, but it would still be done over the counter, so it wouldn't directly impact the market rate. That's the way I read it anyway. And XRP Research Center responded, this is the paragraph that made me believe Ripple is ceasing over-the-counter sales to institutional customers. And yeah, I don't think ceasing is the right word, but anyway, here's what he was referencing. And this is from the Q2 report. Ripple decided to pull back from providing XRP over-the-counter at scale towards the end of the second quarter in light of the OTC desk's ability to source institutional demand for XRP in the open markets. Going forward, Ripple plans to focus institutional sales on markets where the on-exchange liquidity for XRP is insufficient to meet institutional demand. Yeah, so again, the way that I'm reading that is, if a customer wants to purchase XRP, but there's not sufficient liquidity to do it on the open market, Ripple will jump in and they'll be happy to sell XRP. That's the way I read it. If you were reading it a different way, I'm curious to hear how you heard it. It looks like Galgatron read it a different way, or actually XRP Research Center did here right now, because he thought they were saying they're going to cease. But Galgatron responded to that. Keywords are at scale. This paragraph tells me that over-the-counter sales are comprised of both Ripple-sourced and exchange-sourced XRP. So it seems they just pulled back Ripple's contribution. They can't stop over-the-counter sales because institutionally sized purchases can't be made on exchanges. And I gotta admit that I was kind of wondering that. The way I read it is not that Ripple would be selling in conjunction with an exchange. I did not read it that way. Galgatron did, it seems. But, as far as, OTC sales, institutional size purchases can't be made on exchanges. I don't know. It depends on how large these institutional purchases are and how much the exchanges in question have. And so I can definitely see, I just don't feel that Ripple wrote it, but I could definitely see it's possible that you could, if you're an institutional purchaser, that you to fulfill your order, you're getting some from an exchange and some from XRP2 LLC. Perhaps, yeah, okay, fine. There's nothing crazy about that. Makes sense. And then XRP Research Center responded, agreed, institutionally sized purchases can't be made on exchanges, but they're saying it right after this. For me, it's like they're saying other over-the-counter desks already have enough liquidity. Hence, Ripple doesn't need to provide institutions with liquidity now. And so Galvatron responded, I read, Ripple seeded exchanges such that over-the-counter had sufficient liquidity available at these exchanges to adequately source XRP for over-the-counter sales. This breaks the dependency on Ripple to be the source for over-the-counter institutional sales. That's exactly how that I agree with. That is how I interpreted that as well. And that's actually what I said just a moment ago, which is why a couple of other Galgatron tweets actually probably just confused me. But I don't know. I've read it multiple times, and I still am not completely sure if I just don't understand them or if I actually disagree with them. It's one or the other, of course. But XRP Research Center responded to that. That makes sense, and it's quite mind-boggling, actually. I think you could say, as an ancillary comment, that to a certain extent, Ripple is losing control over XRP distribution. And then somebody named CryptoZen jumped in, is that a good thing or a bad thing? To which XRP Research Center responded, definitely good. The overall and ultimate intention of XRapid/XRP from their inception was to create open, distributed, and decentralized liquidity pools where every single person could either contribute or draw liquidity. These are organic steps towards such end. I absolutely agree with that. I'm firmly on that. Yeah. I think that kind of speaks for itself. I don't need to chime in on it. Galvatron responded, though, and it's on the same topic here. So he writes, I would say they relinquished control because they had a lot of XRP go back into escrow, so they're nowhere near exhausted in terms of distribution potential. I agree that the markets appear self-sustaining now, fully bootstrapped and ubiquitous, which is awesome. Firmly agree with that as well. So that's the whole point. I agree. What Galvatron said earlier about basically seeding the environment, that's the word that he used, and now it's able to sustain itself. That is awesome if that's where we're at right now. So cool stuff. Last piece I want to cover before I close up the video here. This is from CoinDesk. Venezuela turned airport taxes into Bitcoin to avoid sanctions. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his administration appear to be leveraging tax revenue and cryptocurrencies as part of a broader effort to evade economic sanctions, an investigation by Spanish newspaper ABC has found. As detailed in a story published Monday, the newspaper asserts it uncovered a scheme by which Maduro and his associates were using a digital wallet app to turn tax revenue from domestic airports into Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies that were then transferred to exchanges in Hong Kong, Hungary, Russia, and China. There, the funds were converted and sent back to Venezuela, according to the report. The effort is the latest example of how the ban on Maduro's government from using U.S. bank accounts and from participating in the open international market has forced it to look at cryptocurrencies as a way to obtain dollars. And so the fascinating thing to me in all of this is, okay, so this can be done to get around sanctions. Got it. That's not ideal unless you're Venezuela, I suppose. But all this was trackable because it's Bitcoin. How about that point, right? So you can see where all of this is actually going. It's fascinating nonetheless, so I thought I'd share it with you. But I better close out the video now. This one's already probably over half hour long at this point, and I didn't intend for it to be quite that long. But hey, when I start talking, honestly, I don't know if it's going to be a short video or a long video. I just cover it. Whatever long it takes to cover it, I cover it. So take that for what it's worth. Anyway, I am not a financial advisor. Do not buy or sell anything because of anything that I say or write. That would be a very, very, very bad idea. Until next time, to the moon, Lambo!